Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 14, Temperance, Part 2. Temperance, as a spiritual exercise, signifies the task of knowing the relationship between the image or monad, the likeness or phenomenal personality, and the guardian angel or individual grace. This means to say that one should find the source, current, and direction of inner life in grasping its nature and role, and work and live in conformity with this knowledge. Firstly, the relationship between image and likeness. What is the intimate experience of this, and how does it reveal itself? The following is a straightforward answer. The contact established between image and likeness is experienced as inner weeping. Weeping is the reality of the fact that the two sisters, the image and the likeness, touch. The usual experience rendered by the expression, "I am moved to tears," is only a reflection of what happens when image and likeness touch. They then mingle their tears, and the inner current which results from this is the life of the human soul. Tears, sweat, and blood are the three substances of the threefold mystical, gnostic, magical mystery of man. To be touched from above is tears. The effort to conform to that which is above is sweat, and the consummated marriage of grace from above and effort from below is blood. Tears announce the engagement of the eternal and the temporal. Sweat is the trial that this entails, and blood is the region where the wedding of eternity and the moment is celebrated, and where their marriage is consummated. The mystery, i.e. it is more than an arcanum, is whole and indivisible. Tears, sweat, and blood. But certain people seek and would grasp the mystery only in tears. Others hope to find it only in sweat. Still others have a presentiment that, beyond all inner experiences and endeavours, the alliance exists through the blood and in the blood, and they do not want to know or recognize the other two aspects of the mystery. Here we have the inner reasons for the three principal heresies. For every serious heresy is a truth over-accentuated at the expense of the whole truth, i.e. at the expense of the living organism of truth. For those who seek only tears are inclined to quietism or illuminism. Those who prefer sweat, i.e. effort of will, easily fall into the Pelagian heresy of denying grace, and those who seek the mystery only in the blood often arrive at the Lutheran heresy, where work, i.e. effort, counts for nothing. But the mystery, I repeat, is whole and indivisible. Tears, sweat and blood, engagement, trial and wedding, faith, hope and love. Concerning tears, this is what flows between the two vases, that of the image and that of the likeness, which are held by the guardian angel of the card of the 14th arcanum of the tarot. The 14th arcanum therefore teaches the spiritual exercise dedicated to the mystery of tears. Tears, like sweat and blood, signify, both as an expression and as a fluidic substance, more than the physical body fluid secreted by glands in the eyes. They signify also the subtle fluid of a spiritual and psychic nature which emanates from the heart, i.e. the 12-petaled lotus of man's superphysical organization. The expression to have tears in one's voice already points to inner tears, and the expression to lament one's weaknesses goes further in the same direction. The fact that there are tears of sorrow, joy, admiration, compassion, tenderness, etc. signifies that tears are produced by the intensity of the inner life. They flow, whether inwardly or outwardly is not important, when the soul, moved by the spirit or by the outer world, experiences a higher degree of intensity in its inner life than is customary. The soul who cries is therefore more living, and therefore fresher and younger than when it does not cry. The gift of tears was always considered by the masters of Christian spirituality as a grace from the Holy Spirit, for it is thanks to this gift that the soul surpasses itself and ascends to a degree of intensity of life which is certainly above that to which it is accustomed. Now, the gift of tears is a comparatively recent spiritual phenomenon in the history of human spirituality. In the ancient world, one wept only ritually, i.e. through verbal lamentations and through prescribed gestures of mourning or grief. and it was amongst the chosen people, Israel, that real weeping began. It was as a manifestation of the share that the chosen people had in the mission of preparing for the coming of Christ, who wept at the time of Lazarus' resuscitation, and who sweated sweat and blood the night in the Garden of Olives, that real weeping came to have its rudimentary origin from the womb of this people. And to the present day the Jews preserve, cultivate, and respect the gift of tears. In fact, every revelation in the narrative of the Zohar is preceded or accompanied by the weeping of the one who had it, and who comes to share it with the others. And, more recently, it was the same with the Tzaddikim, the righteous ones of the Hasidim of Eastern Europe, and the weeping wall in Jerusalem. Therefore we owe to this people not only the Bible, not only Christ in the flesh, and not only the work of the apostles, but also the gift of tears, warm and sincere, which is the vivifying fluid that emanates from contact between the image and the likeness in us. Anti-Semitism, good Lord. Ought not elementary gratitude suffice to grant the place of honour at the table of European culture to the Jews, or rather to humbly ask them to accept it, since this place is due to them by human and divine right? Honour thy father and thy mother, says the divine commandment, and provided that we are not illegitimate children or foundlings, who are our spiritual parents, whom we are bound to honour, if not the Jews? But I believe that in writing these things I am acting like a man who wants to force an open door, for I cannot imagine that your sentiments, dear unknown friend, are not identical to mine in this matter. Above I said that the personages of the Zohar cry when they grasp a profound spiritual truth. The following is what there is to say on this subject from the point of view of Christian Hermeticism. There are three principal modes of authentic spiritual experience: vision, inspiration, and intuition, or perception of spiritual phenomena, spiritual communication, and spiritual identification. Vision presents and shows us spiritual things, inspiration infuses us with understanding of them, and intuition reveals to us their essence by way of assimilation with our essence. Thus, St. Paul had the vision of Christ on the way to Damascus, from whom he received communications that he obeyed, and the carrying out of which constituted his apostolic work, including his journeys. And when he said, "I live, but it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me," Galatians 2:20. This was knowledge through identification or intuition. Now, vision augments experience, inspiration augments knowledge just as it does understanding, and intuition is the metamorphosis and growth no longer of what one experiences and understands, but rather of what one is. Through intuition, one becomes another. Through inspiration, one apprehends new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, and through vision, one's domain of experience is enlarged. One has a revelation of new facts inaccessible to the senses and to intellectual invention. In practice, it is not so that vision, inspiration, and intuition are successive stages following the order vision, inspiration, intuition. For there are those on the spiritual path who have only the experience of intuition, and still others who are only inspired, without ever having visions. But whatever the kind of mode of spiritual experience may be, at the final count it is always a matter of becoming, i.e. intuition. Thus one can say that in principle, vision and inspiration are only means for arriving at intuition. Now, intuition takes place in the blood, inspiration in tears, and vision in sweat. For an authentic vision always entails an increase of effort in order to bear it, in order to remain upright in the face of it. Vision has a weight, sometimes overwhelming, which demands a great effort on the part of the soul in order not to give way under the weight of the vision. Authentic inspiration always entails an inner upheaval. It pierces the soul like an arrow in wounding it, and in making it experience that profound emotion which is a synthesis of sorrow and joy. For I cannot imagine that your sentiments, dear unknown friend, are not identical to mine in this matter. Above I said that the personages of the Zohar cry when they grasp a profound spiritual truth. The following is what there is to say on this subject from the point of view of Christian Hermeticism. There are three principal modes of authentic spiritual experience: vision, inspiration, and intuition, or perception of spiritual phenomena, spiritual communication, and spiritual identification. Vision presents and shows us spiritual things. Inspiration infuses us with understanding of them, and intuition reveals to us their essence by way of assimilation with our essence. Thus, St. Paul had the vision of Christ on the way to Damascus, from whom he received communications that he obeyed, and the carrying out of which constituted his apostolic work, including his journeys. And when he said, "I live, but it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me," Galatians 2:20. This was knowledge through identification or intuition. Now, vision augments experience. Inspiration augments knowledge just as it does understanding, and intuition is the metamorphosis and growth no longer of what one experiences and understands, but rather of what one is. Through intuition, one becomes another. Through inspiration, one apprehends new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, and through vision, one's domain of experience is enlarged. One has a revelation of new facts inaccessible to the senses and to intellectual invention. In practice, it is not so that vision, inspiration, and intuition are successive stages following the order vision, inspiration, intuition. For there are those on the spiritual path who have only the experience of intuition, and still others who are only inspired, without ever having visions. But whatever the kind of mode of spiritual experience may be, at the final count, it is always a matter of becoming, i.e., intuition. Thus, one can say that in principle, vision and inspiration are only means for arriving at intuition. Now, intuition takes place in the blood, inspiration in tears, and vision in sweat. For an authentic vision always entails an increase of effort in order to bear it, in order to remain upright in the face of it. Vision has a weight, sometimes overwhelming, which demands a great effort on the part of the soul in order not to give way under the weight of the vision. Authentic inspiration always entails an inner upheaval. It pierces the soul like an arrow in wounding it, and in making it experience that profound emotion which is a synthesis of sorrow and joy. The symbol of the rose cross, a cross from the center of which a rose blossoms out, renders the essence of the experience of inspiration in the best way that I know. The rose cross expresses the mystery of tears, i.e., that of inspiration, with force and clarity. It portrays the joy of sorrow and the sorrow of joy, which together comprise inspiration. With respect to intuition, it is no longer a matter either of the weight of riches or of the romance of the engagement of the rose and the cross, but rather of consummating the marriage of life and death. What lives, thereby dies, and what dies, thereby is reborn. Thereby blood is mingled with the blood, and is transformed alchemically from the fluid of separation into the fluid of union. There are three ways of seeing the cross: the crucifix, the rose cross, and the gilded cross bearing a rose of silver. The crucifix is the greatest treasure of vision. It is the vision of divine and human love. The black cross with a rose blossoming from it is the treasure of inspiration. This is divine and human love speaking in the soul. The gilded cross bearing a rose of silver is the treasure of intuition. This is love transforming the soul. But the mystery of the cross is one and indivisible. Whoever does not worship the crucifix cannot be inspired by it to the point of accepting it, which is inspiration, and still less can he identify himself with it, which is intuition. It is a matter of a single cross, a single indivisible Christian mystery. Therefore, someone would certainly be in error if, instead of seeing in the crucifix the way, the truth, and the life, he were to think of founding, for example, a community of fraternity of the resurrection with the gilded cross and rose of silver as its symbol, replacing the universal symbol of Christianity, the crucifix. He would be in error, I say, because the gilded cross or the rose cross in no way replace the crucifix, but are included and implied in it. It is the cross of the crucifix which becomes inspirative, the rose cross, and which is transformed into solar light, the gilded cross, bearing the receptive soul, the rose of silver. Resurrection is only crucifixion having reached the stage of fructification. It is realized crucifixion. Therefore, one cannot, separate from one another the mortal sweat of the crucifix, the inspirative tears of acceptance of the cross, the rose cross, and the blood transmuted through identification with the cross, the gilded cross bearing the rose of silver. The mystery of sweat, tears, and blood is one and indivisible. It is the same with Christianity. It is one and indivisible. One cannot, separate from so-called exoteric Christianity, its gnosis and mysticism, or so-called esoteric Christianity. Esoteric Christianity is entirely within exoteric Christianity. It does not exist and cannot exist separately from it. Christian Hermeticism is only a special vocation within the universal Christian community, the vocation specific to the dimension of depth. Just as there are in the universal church vocations to the priesthood, monastic life, religious knighthood, etc., so there is a vocation, as irresistible and irrevocable as the others, to Hermeticism. This is a vocation to a life lived in consciousness of the unity of cult, or Christian sacred magic, revelation, or Christian sacred gnosis, and salvation, or Christian sacred mysticism, just as the unity of the whole of mankind's authentic spiritual life throughout its entire history always was, is, and always will be Christocentric. Hermeticism is the vocation to live the universal and eternal truth of the prologue to St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him, and nothing that has been made was made without him. In him was the life, and the life was the light of men. This was the true light that enlightens every man coming into the world. John 1, 1-4, 9. Now, unity of the light in the whole past, in the present, and in the whole future, unity of the light in the east, west, north, and south, unity of the light in magic, gnosis, and mysticism, unity of the light, lastly, in cult, revelation, and salvation. This is the hermetic vocation, which is, I repeat, as irresistible and irrevocable as that of priest, monk, or religious knight. I may add that it is to you, who are irresistibly and irrevocably called to Hermeticism, that I address these letters, and that it is you whom I call dear unknown friends. I acknowledge that I have also known friends, but with respect to these latter, they are for the most part to be found in the spiritual world. All the more do I address myself to them in these letters, and how many times in writing these letters I have felt the fraternal embraces of these friends, including here Papou, Caillata, Paladin, Eliphas Levi, and Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. Friends here and there, the mystery is one and indivisible, sealed by sweat, tears, and blood. You, friends who are there, now you know that there is only one truth, one light, one Christ, one community, and that there is neither separate exotericism and esotericism, nor separate exoteric and esoteric communities. May the friends who are here know this also. Tears are the element proper to inspiration, and he who is moved to weep, inwardly or outwardly is not important, before a crucifix, is already inspired by it. He then contemplates the rose cross in the crucifix, and he who fixes his eyes on the crucifix at the supreme moment of agony, where his blood begins to chill, he, in drawing from it a new warmth to replace the warmth which is leaving him, lives intuition. He already contemplates the gilded cross bearing the rose of silver. Inspiration is the principal acting in tears. Just like weeping, inspiration takes place in the guise of flowing between two vases. In inspiration, whatever its true source of origin may be, a flow is active, which is produced between the higher self or image and the lower self or likeness. Here there is a flow which results from the simultaneous collaboration of the higher eye, or ear, and the lower eye, or lower ear. This means to say that higher understanding and lower understanding being in contact, vibrate in unison, each with its own voice and in terms of its own language, and thus together produce a concrete inspiration. The technique of vision differs from that of inspiration in that in vision it is not a matter of the simultaneous collaboration of two eyes or ears, higher and lower, but rather of the passive imprint that the lower self alone receives from above. As it is not a matter of the collaboration of two understandings, it can be that the lower self, the personality, experiences a vision without understanding it. It can therefore remain incomprehensible for a long time. Concerning intuition, this is due likewise to a single active principle. Here the lower self identifies itself with the higher self, i.e., it raises itself to the latter and effaces itself in the higher self, to the point of becoming a passive and mute presence. And then it is the higher self alone which is active. These three schematic representations represent at the same time the arcana of tears, sweat, and blood. In intuition, where the lower self experiences a kind of death, which is transformed into life in the higher self, the mystery of blood, symbolized by the gilded cross with the rose of silver, is accomplished. In vision, where the weight of revelation from above falls on the lower self and must be supported by it, it is a matter of the mystery of sweat, symbolized by the cross of the crucifix, the cross that the crucified one had to carry to Calvary, under the weight of which he fell 3 times. And in inspiration, where the unblemished image and the fallen likeness unite to give birth to a new word, it is a matter of the mystery of tears, symbolized by the rose cross. It is the mystery of tears and of inspiration that the 14th arcanum of the tarot aims at in particular. It is the spiritual exercise dedicated to inspiration. Inspiration, as follows from the whole of the preceding and as is evident from all authentic experience of it, is not something which simply happens, as in the case of vision. Nor is it something which results from the sum total of all efforts at self-sacrifice, mortification, and the reduction of oneself to nothing, as is the case with intuition. Rather, it is a co-activity, the concerted activity of the higher self and the lower self. It is essentially the flow emanating from 2 vases at once. The practical arcanum of inspiration is therefore the knowledge of how to be active and passive at the same time. Active in what concerns the question or demand, passive in what concerns the answer or solution. It would be false simply to formulate inwardly a question and subsequently assume a passive, though calm and silent, attitude of waiting for an answer through inspiration. One can thus certainly listen and wait for a long time. As a rule, nothing happens. It would be equally false to make a great effort at discursive thought and divining imagination, so as to force inspiration as if it were a salary for work done. No, it is neither passivity in waiting, nor equally activity of thought and imagination which realizes the state of soul appropriate for inspiration. It is a matter of simultaneous activity and passivity. Let us try to explain. 18th century rationalism advanced the formula, what is clear is true, to which is added the corollary, what is not clear is not true. Now, we have inherited these 2 formulae, consciously or instinctively, from a century when thinking modo geometrico, or in a geometrical mode, was the ideal. Certainly we no longer believe that everything which is clear is true, but all the same we postulate that what is true should at the same time be clear. We demand that truth must entail clarity. Guided by this principle, we endeavour to be precise, i.e., to delineate clear lines around the subject which occupies us. But in so doing, we effect an intellectual enclosure. That which is enclosed is clear, yes, but it is separated by the enclosure from the great flood of truth, of which we have taken possession of only a drop. The drop is clear, but it is only a drop taken from the flood, i.e. from the great context of truth. Having understood this, we can be prompted to think in another way. We can try to think with the flood, i.e. no longer to think alone, but rather together with the anonymous choir of thinkers above, below, yesterday and tomorrow. I think then gives way to it thinks. This thinking together is active and passive at the same time. It is active insofar as you are thinking, and it is passive insofar as something thinks with you. There are two vases from which thought flows, yours and also another. And this is precisely the state of soul that is necessary in order to have inspirations. The arcanum of inspiration, the 14th arcanum of the tarot, is that of two sources and two simultaneous currents of thought, which mingle, unite, and constitute authentic inspiration. I have described above the process of thinking together, or that of inspiration, wholly as a kind of special technique. I had to do so for the sake of clarity. But clarity and truth are not identical. I must therefore correct what I had to sacrifice of the truth in favour of clarity. What follows is the correction. There is, truth to tell, no technique in the intimate and spiritual domain of inspiration, just as no technique exists in the domains of vision and intuition. In these domains, everything is essentially moral, for in order to think together, one thing before everything else is required, and this is humility. In thinking, in order to think together, I have to bow before an intelligence surpassing mine, and to do so not in general terms and in an abstract way, but rather concretely, by yielding the author's exclusive rights to the anonymous co-thinker. Thinking together means to say thinking on one's knees, i.e. humbling oneself before the other, diminishing oneself so that he may increase. This is thought prayer or prayer thought. Neither the concentration exercises of Raja Yoga nor the breathing and other exercises of Hatha Yoga will render us inspired. It is humility alone, due to poverty, obedience and chastity, the three universal and eternal vows, which renders us inspirable. It cannot be helped. The spiritual world is essentially moral, and inspiration is the fruit of humility in effort, and of effort with humility. Ora et labora is therefore the key to the door of inspiration, as it is the key to many other doors besides. What I have said concerning humility as the preliminary condition for inspiration calls for in its turn a further detail, if not a correction. For humility can sometimes prove not only sterile with respect to inspiration, but can even be an obstacle put in its way. Thus, it is humility which paralyzes the aspiration to knowledge of the truth and to perfection in the exercise of virtues and capabilities. Someone who humbly says the following will not receive inspiration. I am not occupied with divine beings and with the spiritual world, because for that one has to be a saint and a sage, and I am neither one nor the other. Preoccupation with the soul's salvation alone can certainly advance the soul quite far on the path of purity and innocence, but it can at the same time leave it in complete ignorance with respect to the world, history, and problems of mankind's spiritual life. Many an authentic saint did not know much concerning the world and its history, on account of the humility which protected him from going out from the circle of what is strictly necessary for salvation. Hunger and thirst for the truth, which comprises God, the world, and mankind, nevertheless underlie the inspiration which falls under the law of ora et labora. The hermeticist also will not be inspired if he is not humble. But no more will he be inspired if he does not apprehend, in the aspiration to the truth, the art of forgetting himself. Whatever he may be, humble or presumptuous, innocent or sinful, he must be driven by hunger and thirst for the truth concerning God, the world, and mankind. One should know how to ask, and one should dare to ask, whilst forgetting one's humility and one's presumption. Children know how to ask and dare to ask. Are they presumptuous? No, because each question that they pose is at the same time an avowal of their ignorance. Are they humble, therefore? They are in so far as they know and sense their ignorance, and they are not insofar as they are driven by hunger and thirst to know and understand to the point of forgetting themselves, including all humility and all presumption in them. In this, the Hermeticist imitates the child. He wants to know who, what, how, and why, concerning life and death, good and evil, creation and evolution, history and the human soul. People in the natural sciences, whose hair is grey through study and research, have abandoned these questions. Childish questions, they say. They resign themselves to a single question, that of the technical how. The why and the what, not to speak of the who, are pre-scientific questions which they leave to theology and the belles lettres. Still, we Hermeticists have conserved the whole repertoire of questions from our childhood, the what and the how, the why and the who. Are we backward? Have we progressed beyond others? Backward or progressive, it does not matter. We have kept living the hunger and thirst for knowledge and understanding from our childhood, and it is this which leads us to ask things that mature people of contemporary civilization no longer ask. What? Have we not learnt from the history of civilization that these questions are unknowable, that the ignoramus, we do not know, of today was preceded by the heroic effort of innumerable generations aspiring to answer these questions, and that it was after this unfruitful effort that one resigned oneself to the ignoramus, we do not know? What chance, therefore, what hope, remains for us after all this? Our chance, our hope, is inspiration. And it is precisely because we ask in the way that children do that we have the hope, no, the certainty, that our Father who is in heaven will give us the answer, that he will not give us a stone instead of bread, or a serpent in place of a fish. Inspiration, the two vases from whence flows the living water held by a winged angel, is the hope and the chance for the survival of Hermeticism in the centuries to come. Dear unknown friend, say to yourself that you know nothing, and at the same time say to yourself that you are able to know everything, and, armed with this healthy humility and this healthy presumption of children, immerse yourself in the pure and strengthening element of the thinking together of inspiration. May the winged angel be present in this enterprise of yours, and may he hold the two vases from which inspiration will pour. The arcanum of inspiration is of vital practical importance, not only for Hermeticism, but also for the spiritual history of mankind in general. For just as in the individual human biography there are decisive moments of inspiration, so there are in mankind's biography, which is history, decisive points where far-reaching inspirations enter into the spiritual life of humanity. The great religions are such inspirations. In ancient India, the rishis had inspiration, which became the source of the Vedas. In ancient Persia, the great Zarathustra, or Golden Star, had inspiration, which became the source of the Zend Avesta. Moses and the prophets had inspiration, which became the source of the Old Testament in the Bible. The event of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ was followed by the inspiration which was the source of the written Gospels, of which each author is twofold, man and inspiring cherubim. Lastly, Islam refers to no other source than the inspiration that Muhammad received from the Archangel Gabriel, which became the source of the Quran. With respect to Buddhism, which is the religion of humanism pure and simple, it also regards as the source of its origin the spiritual event in the soul of Gautama Buddha under the Bodhi tree, where the four sacred truths of Buddhism were revealed in a sudden way, excluding all doubt, i.e. by way of inspiration. The great religions are therefore the inspirations of mankind, and the history of religion is that of inspiration. Misunderstandings with regard to inspiration and ignorance of its practical arcanum will also have distressing and tragic repercussions in mankind's history. There will be people who believe that inspiration is obtained through effort, and others who will believe that it is produced only in complete passivity of the soul. Thus all forms of Pelagianism and Quietism will arise in the history of religion. All those who do not know that the arcanum of inspiration is that of activity and passivity simultaneously will fall necessarily either into Pelagianism or into Quietism. Individual psychological experiences, including the experience of setbacks and disillusions, in the realm of aspiring to inspiration, have played an enormous role in the catastrophic upheavals which have taken place in the history of Christianity. Thus, an Augustinian monk of the 16th century ardently desired inspiration. To this end, he practiced the rigorous asceticism of fasting, mortification of the flesh, and vigils of prayer. He believed that effort would procure inspiration for him, but he had none. Then, disillusioned as he was, he advanced the doctrine of the vanity of work, of all effort. Faith alone suffices for salvation. Here lies the origin of Lutheran Protestantism. In the same century, a doctor of law underwent a sudden conversion, from which he concluded that inspiration is the work of God and God alone, without any participation of human effort and freedom. It is God and God alone who has chosen for all eternity those whom he has predestined to salvation amongst the mass predestined to perdition. Here lies the origin of Calvinist Protestantism. If Martin Luther and John Calvin had known that inspiration is activity and passivity, or effort and grace simultaneously, the one would not have seen man as only a sinner, and the other would not have conceived of God as a cosmic tyrant. St. John of the Cross was needed to show that one can pass by the darkness and aridity of the senses and of the mind without drawing back and without despair, just as one can effect a profound reform, in the sense of the practice of the poverty and moral radicalism of the Gospels, without at the same time attacking the unity of the Church. In truth, St. John of the Cross atoned for Martin Luther. Yet another saint, Ignatius of Loyola, was needed to demonstrate that man can choose God and his cause in the full freedom of love instead of being chosen by God, and that just as Jacob wrestled until the break of day, saying, "I will not let you go unless you bless me," Genesis 32:26, so can each free human will, chosen or not, embrace the cause of God voluntarily and will be blessed by God. St. Ignatius of Loyola atoned for John Calvin by living in the voluntary obedience of love for the God of love, instead of the obedience of a poor wretch before the power of the Almighty. With respect to Christian Hermeticism, it has knowledge of the arcanum of inspiration, and it will never range itself on the side of those who believe that inspiration is made, nor on the side of those who believe that it is merited by pure and simple passivity of the soul. Hermeticism knows the law of the marriage of opposites, and it knows that inspiration is the marriage of activity and passivity in the soul. Read Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, and you will nowhere find either Pelagianism or Quietism, but rather throughout is the twofold faith, in God and man, in grace and human effort. Ora et labora is truly the practical view which is evident in the whole of the work of Saint-Martin. And the mature Eliphas Levi, and Josephin Paladin, and the mature Papou, they all professed to the twofold faith, in God and man, in grace and human effort. This amounts to saying that they knew the arcanum of inspiration, the arcanum which is found represented symbolically by the 14th card of the tarot. I have mentioned some Hermeticists whom I suppose that you, dear unknown friend, know of. But there are many others who ought to be named as guardians of the ancient tradition of the arcanum of inspiration. But what will the name of Shmakov say to you, for example, or the name Rudnikova? These are names which, like the yellow leaves of autumn, repose in forgetfulness beneath the immense white shroud of snow which covers pre-revolutionary Russia. Be that as it may, there is a community of Hermeticists, known and unknown, but the majority of whose members are anonymous. And it is only a small part of this community which is composed of those who know one another and meet one another face to face in the full daylight of the world of the senses. Another part, still less numerous, is composed of those who know each other and meet each other face to face in vision. But it is inspiration which unites all members of the community of Hermeticists, without regard as to whether they are near to one another or far apart, whether they know each other or not, or whether they are living or deceased. Inspiration, truth to tell, is what constitutes the Hermetic community. It is inspiration which is the link between its members and within which all its members meet one another. The community of inspiration, this is what in reality the community of Hermeticists is. It is inspiration in common which underlies the mental and symbolic language common to Hermeticists, the language of analogy, the marriage of opposites, synthesis, moral logic, the dimension of depth added to those of clarity and breadth of knowledge, and above all the ardent belief that all is knowable and revealable, that the mystery is infinite knowability and revealability. This common inspiration, this language that we have in common, is the inner word which guides and impels us, inwardly and outwardly at the same time, in all our aspirations. The Papou of 1890 did not know what Papou would become in 1917, but he already directed his efforts towards what he would know, feel and realize, what he would be, in a word, in 1917. This was because he knew in 1890 what he did not know. It was because the inspiration which underlies Christian Hermeticism was present and was working in him. And it was thanks to this inspiration that he broke with the neo-Buddhist stream of the Theosophical Society, and that he preferred the intellectual Christianity of St. Ives d'Alvedra to the intellectual Buddhism of the Theosophical Society. And it was again thanks to this inspiration that he preferred the real Christianity of Maître Philippe of Léon to the Christian intellectualism of his youth. Yes, the Papou of 1917, praying and working, was the product of the inspiration which guided and impelled the young student of medicine, subsequent enthusiast for occult science, subsequent bold magician, and again subsequently the lover of great intellectual syntheses. Here we have a particular example of the gradual realization of inspiration working from the days of youth. In the beginning was the Word, is the law not only of the world, but also of the realization of inspiration in each individual biography. And the entire community of Hermeticists lives under this law, under the law of inspiration. Everyone lives under this law. The community of Hermeticists is distinguished from the rest of mankind only in that it is born, in an irresistible way, to be conscious of it, and to know what happens both to them and to the rest of humanity. The lot of Hermeticists differs from that of every human being only in that the former hunger and thirst for comprehensive knowledge of that which the latter simply undergo. Their lot does not bring any privilege with it. On the contrary, rather, it is an added duty with which Hermeticists are charged, notably the inner duty to understand the totality of miracles and disasters, which is life and the world. This duty makes them appear presumptuous or childish in the eyes of the world, but it is the arcanum of inspiration, the arcanum of the winged entity pouring living water from one vase into another, which renders them such as they are.